Glad you're all here. So today is going to be another exciting um, presentation, hopefully, and learning opportunity. So what we're going to do in this Beyond the Course course is talk really about what are some other tools that we can use beside just an e-learning module to convey our messages. And I want to start with how everyone is doing today. But I always like, let's do something a little bit different than that. Let's type in uh, good news. So even if you're doing lousy today, just go ahead and find a piece of good news that you have and go ahead and type that in. So we'll start off with hopefully a good vibe. I do this with my graduate students, and sometimes it's really good. Like I'll say, hey, does anybody have good news to report today? And then sometimes they're like, no. And then somebody says no. And then I'm like, okay, then I have to come up with some good news. Oh, Julie is certified as a scuba diver. That's awesome. My brother dives. I do not dive though. Create a short form. Yeah. Oh yeah. If anybody hasn't checked out, Andrew created a short form video in Circle. So go ahead and check that out. Andrew, do you want to talk a little bit about the story of creating your video?
Yeah, it was definitely, I think to Carl's point in that last session, like getting it down to the time was really interesting, but it also kind of forces you to think about, at first my idea was video is write out the script and do it. And then I was like, yeah, it needs to be mixed up a little bit. So I tried to put in some title boards with it and to make it a little bit more engaging. So it wasn't just that one modality. So it was a good learning process and just, and kind of like stretched a little creativity because like don't just talk, like add some other kind of like images to that. And I think per Carl's example, just some of what we talked about last week. So good experience overall. I definitely recommend it. But yeah, the 30-second time limit is very interesting. Seems like it'll be easy, but very challenging, but a good challenge.
Yeah, great. No, thanks for taking that challenge and thanks for posting it. And if anyone else wants to post it, that's awesome as well. So thank you. So what we want to talk about today, and is it Diwali? Is that how it's pronounced, Serena? The Festival of Lights?
Yes, that's how it's pronounced.
Ah, that is fantastic. That sounds like a neat event.
It's the biggest festival in India, about over 1 billion people celebrating today. It's
Oh,
great.
wow. That's pretty neat. And I got to pronounce it correctly because my pronunciation usually is horrible. So I was very excited about that. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about. I had Esther there post a resource file. We're not going to use that right away, but we're going to use that hopefully today. So my goal is to talk about infographics and have you make your own infographic as we speak. So I'm going to give you a little bit of time to do that, and we're going to just go ahead and make it in PowerPoint. So we don't even have to go out to another tool, although there's several tools. Canva is a good one for that. And we're going to make a static one as opposed to interactive. But let's look at an infographic and talk about why we're doing this again. So we want to talk about breaking out of the four walls of a course. We want to do that because people are constantly pressed for time and constantly asking for a just-in-time format. And as we discussed earlier, it doesn't mean that all learning should be done this way, but breaking out of the four walls allows us to just do quick hits and allows us to expand the ecosystem of learning that we present to people. So last week we did the short form video, which was, I thought, a lot of fun. This week we're going to talk about infographics. Next week we'll talk about like quick hit games, but also kind of micro learning things that we can do, which aren't even a course. And then we'll hit on job aids as well. So infographics is basically a form of job aid. And what is an infographic? Well, there's lots of different definitions, right? So anytime we have a new word in the field, lots of different people define it. Now, the one thing that I'm not going to get into the distinction here, but there's people that say there's infographics and info posters. So an infographic is one that definitely represents data and makes the data easier to understand. And an info poster is information or instructions, but not data. So the technical definition, I guess, or definition that some people get really hung up on is that infographics are about information and data, and then info posters are more about information and instructions. I would imagine that a lot of what we do would be information and instructions as opposed to infographics. But either way, the definitions have become quite mixed together. So unless you're on something like Jeopardy, it probably doesn't matter that much, but just to keep in mind that there are different approaches to working with the graphics. So what is an infographic? Well, there's lots of different definitions, as I said, but also there's some key elements. It's basically a data-rich visualization of a story or a thesis. So basically, one of the things that we're going to talk about is when you create an infographic, thinking about what story are you telling, or I would say from a learning perspective, what learning objective are we trying to impact? And what behavior are we trying to impact? And we want to educate and inform people. So sometimes learning isn't always about, or sometimes our job it isn't always about learning. Sometimes it's about informing or making people aware of things. We don't need a course often to make somebody aware of something. We can make them aware of something with an infographic or some kind of short video or some kind of short information. And the infographic also is designed really to gain attention and build awareness. So what we can think of is a transmedia campaign. So if we think about changing behavior, because that's what we do as learning and development professionals, a single course probably isn't going to change behavior. Even a series of courses may not change behavior. What changes behavior is shaping the behavior over time. So meaning that we need to hone in on the behavior and we need to provide people incentives for changing that behavior and information on how to change the behavior. And that all works really well with a targeted campaign of which an infographic can be a part of. So there are really three kinds of infographics. There are static, motion, and interactive. So here's a motion. This is more of a, I would say this motion example is more of an info poster, but it was about the, and did I share the sound? No, okay, let's go ahead and do that. It's really about the
crisis of credit, visualized. What is the credit crisis? It's a worldwide financial fiasco involving terms you've probably heard like subprime mortgages, collateralized debt obligations, frozen credit markets, and credit default swaps. Who's affected?
So you might say that this is more of an info poster, providing some information, or even I dare say that an animated or motion infographic certainly seems to be similar to an explainer video. So there's a little bit of fuzziness, I think, around those items. But our point really is to get across a message and to change behavior, as I said before. Here is an interactive infographic. So this one's kind of nice. You can just click on the information and it gives you information about key elements. Now, the one thing I would say is that this is an awful lot of text for an infographic. So while we have some infographic items here, elements, and it is interactive, it's a lot of information that they're throwing at us. So maybe this isn't the best example of an interactive infographic, although it does allow us to kind of click around and see different elements and information. So what should be in an infographic when we're creating it? Well, obviously we want some kind of a attention gaining title. We're going to have data in there if it's truly an infographic. We want a theme, a visual theme, as well as the story, image, text, section dividers, and often they contain a citation. We may or may not have that. So what makes a good infographic? And we'll talk about this and think about this as we create our own. But one, it tells a story. Two, it takes you on a predefined path. So some infographics are just kind of a blah of information all thrown up at once, and you kind of have to pick your way through it. Well, we really shouldn't do that. We should really have a way that the learner can, we should parse the data information for the learner. We're designing the instruction that's meant to be provided, so we should take some time to make that a predetermined path. We also like to provide maybe a new angle, maybe not a list. Sometimes people fall into making an infographic as just a list of items, but typically it's some kind of asymmetrical design that draws your attention. I always like the phrase that was attributed to Pablo Picasso, but apparently he never said it. There's so many great quotes that people never said, but if they said them, they would be brilliant. But Picasso supposedly said, learn the rules like a professional so you can break them like an artist. And I think it's a great way to think about creating an infographic. Let's make the infographic more of a kind of a little bit of an art piece as we go through. And why? Well, because, a lot of people are like, just the facts. We just need the information. But again, we're competing internally and externally with a lot of data sources. And if we don't bring our own little flair or interest, it's not going to get through all of that clutter. Now, we certainly also want the instructional design of value, the instructional value that I talk about. We need to bring meaning and the content immediately to the learner. So when they look at the infographic, it should, yeah, I got it. I got the information that I need. It needs to be well designed. So we're taking a large amount of information and we're making it simple. We're focusing only on the key points. An infographic, we're not condensing an entire, we're not presenting an entire novel. We want to provide that little piece of information. And we do that by focusing on one key objective, right? You can't teach everything in the infographic. So you need to do that as well. And then we need visual appeal. We want it to look good, and we want a catchy headline. And Heather, I think you're absolutely right. There seems to be a ton of overlap between infographic and well-designed research posters. And I think infographic, research posters weren't as flashy as infographic. And interestingly, infographics came about when they started to do information online, and they were trying to attract eyeballs. And so some of the techniques that researchers and people have used in kind of journals and things like that weren't widely adopted or even known. And then infographic became more widely known and more widely adopted. So some basic design tips is you want to determine your visual theme, so your colors and your messages. We'll talk briefly about that in a moment. And then keep it simple, as I said. And another interesting rule that I came across, and this is by no means evidence-based, but it's kind of a rule of thumb that people have talked about, is a 60-30-10 kind of concept where you have 60% of your infographic is your primary color, usually the background, 30% is your secondary color where you're giving the information, and then things are highlighted about 10% in your third color. So that's just kind of a rule that's been bantering around the internet in terms of infographics that you may want to consider. But again, I've seen that rule broken many times to great effect, so it just depends on how you want to do that. And then create a hierarchy with the headlines. So you may have a large headline, then kind of smaller headlines, and you want to keep the number of fonts limited, 2 to 3 maybe. And then we want to do a bunch of different things, right? So when we think about visual, what's visually appealing, and how do we make this text-based content into visuals? Well, one is to replace names and titles with icons. So rather than titling something, put a giant icon there. Use icons in graphs and charts. So instead of, I had those apples across it, instead of showing a bar chart or instead of showing a pie chart, show icons representing the concept that you want to talk about. Establish a theme with your icons. So you don't want to mix and match icons. You want to try to keep the same family of icons. Now, fortunately, if you're not an artist like I'm not an artist. There are tons of places to get icons and very helpful places to get icons as well. If you're going to do a list, use the icon. You could use them as part of the background. You could use different icons together that we'll look at. You can use color to bring together the iconic elements. Think about formality and informal, right? So use formal fonts with formal icons. Use informal icons with informal fonts, you know, to keep that consistency of look and feel. Use your images to evoke the right emotion, and use section dividers to help orient the learner. And then you may even want to use geographic shapes to frame key points or key objects, as I'll show a little bit later. Here's some story on color. These are some thoughts on what kind of colors convey what kind of emotions. If you want to do that, let me hide my meeting controls. So blue typically is calm. It typically means opportunities, like blue sky, typically professional kind of look. Red, danger, you know, don't do this. Anger, passion, romance. Orange sometimes is optimism, adventure. Yellow is caution, attention. Green, clean energy, health. Black might be mystery. Good, very good for contrast. Now, you have to be aware, though, different colors have different meaning in different cultures. So to say universally across the world that orange means adventure, youth, and optimism, you know, probably not. So you want to be cognizant of the awareness of the different colors, but you can't come up with like a universal color scheme that's going to get all messages. Now, if you use an infographic online, obviously it's going to go across the organization. But if you print it out as a poster or something, you could localize the different elements as well. And that can be very helpful as you're localizing what people are looking at and able to see. So one thing I also wanted to talk about was thinking about the design of the infographic. So think of the infographic as a 4-column document that you want to do. So you want to start with a heading that typically crosses all four columns, and then you could break up the different columns. So that's how you help an infographic have kind of movement and flow and interest, but not having it look like, you know, a list on one side and a list on the other, by breaking it up. So you might have something in all 4 columns. You might have something in 2 columns. You might have something cut across all 4 columns. And you may want to sandwich that in as you do your document, so that you can have this kind of a nice, you know, starting, content, ending. So let's go ahead and make an infographic. So what I'd like you to do is open up, if you can, a PowerPoint presentation, just a blank PowerPoint. And you could start with the image that I sent that's in the chat, where you can kind of open up and open up the slide. So we're going to make an infographic kind of like this. And I'm going to show you a couple tips that I use in PowerPoint that helps me make these infographics. But before we go ahead and do that, are there any questions or comments?
Is there, Karl, a danger of going to resources which have templates and then force-fitting the learning to the template rather than the other way around? Because you know, a lot of people aren't graphic artists, so all of a sudden you distort the message because it kind of looks nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I see that in a lot of learning design, not just with infographics, but you know, this is the template that Storyline gives me, or this is a template that my company uses, so I'm going to go ahead and use this. And it's very sometimes it's antithetical to the learning outcome. And so I think very often breaking the template and having not an amateur look, but the clean professional look is not always equate to learning. and sometimes a look of not homemade, but the analogy I give is if you think of many years ago, if you wanted to do corporate video, you had to bring in the right camera, and you had to have the right lighting, and everything had to look perfect. Fast forward to now, YouTube has kind of gotten us away from some of those really well-polished videos. I took a course the other day for my organization on diversity and equity and inclusion, and beautifully created videos, but there was no assessment of my knowledge. There was no testing of what I learned. There was no application of the knowledge. It was just really nice videos. And I can tell you, those aren't going to get the learning outcome that somebody is expecting to get. So yeah, absolutely. Sometimes using templates is not the best way to do it. So let's start out with our item. And so what you want to do is you want to go into design, and into design, there's slide size. If we go to slide size, go to custom slide size, and then change it to, you can change it whatever you want, but I kind of kept the aspect ratio. So take the typical slide and make it 26.666 or 667, and then you get a long, and you can make it as long or as short as you want, but that's a good size for an infographic. So you can go ahead and do that. It gives you kind of a nice long canvas on which to work. Now, in the item that I gave you, I put, oh, that's the resource, sorry. I have, in the resource slide, I have a couple of things that I want to show you. Now, you may already know how to do this, but you may not. So here I have the background of a bunch of fruits and vegetables, and I just created the word healthy food, and you can create any kind of font that you want. But here's a couple of neat tricks you can do with healthy food to use it for your infographic. So one of the things I can do is I can click on the background and then shift click on healthy food. And then if I go to drawing tools, I'm able to merge shapes. Now, the order in which you do this is important. The back one, then the front one. So if I wanted to, I could union these together. That doesn't really do anything. It just merges the two together. That's not really helpful for my infographic. I can combine the two though. So this looks kind of nice. So if I wanted to use a photorealistic background and wanted to have my words come through, this allows me to have my words come through in terms of healthy food. So if I click on this, now this is all one banner, and I can use this however I would like. I'm just going to undo that and keep my two banners. I also then, after that, I have fragment, which is really kind of interesting as well. It basically makes each letter an object. So if I move now my, if I move now this, I've got healthy food. And not only that, but each of these are its own independent object. So I can move healthy food in any way that I like to. Now, one of the things that it does is if it's kind of got you know, if it has an I over the T or something like that, or some of them have a figment in the middle of the A, or in this case, in the middle of the E, it kind of breaks those out as fragments as well. But one of the coolest things you can do with that is, so if I have my healthy food here, I can take my E shape and add that back. I can take my shape from the A and add that back as well. So those are some other, I can do my O. So those are some really neat things that you can do with fragmenting your items, which kind of makes it really interesting. So I could either use my healthy food now, or I could use just my words healthy food, and I can stretch them and do anything I want to with those items. So I'm going to, I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to undo all of that to show you the last. So again, I've got my healthy food here. Click on that, click on healthy food, and then go to my merge shapes, and then subtract is the last one, which is very much like the combine one in this particular case. So I wanted to show you just a way that you can and intersect. was another one as well. The thing with intersect is it's not fragmented. So all of this is together. So it works together. So you can pick the one that works best for you, but this gives you a really nice way to create titles and to intersperse. And you'll notice what I did in mine was I did 2 of them. I have a healthy living here and a healthy living here. So this was the one word. This was, I kind of like this one. It was nice. Now notice when I did it, it shines through or the background comes through. So healthy living isn't as apparent if I want to. So what I did is I just snuck a little white background, fill white, I'll send that to the back, and you can see, whoops, that should be working. Oh, I sent it too far back. Oh, I have this in front of it. Okay, that's why. I've been playing with this forever. So, okay, there. So now we have our healthy living. And if I grab this one, I can, no, this one, I can do that. So why don't you go ahead and give that a try? Does anybody have any questions about that? Is anybody working with that? So that's one way to think about adding some element to your infographic. Another thing that you may want to think of using the merge as well is sometimes it's nice to have kind of a wavy bottom, so it's not, you know, straight and for sections. So what you can do is you can take, for example, the section here. I just took a square, insert shape. One shape was a square, and then the bottom shape is a ribbon. So I just took one of the ribbons that are down here. I think I took this ribbon, the wave, as opposed to the double wave, but you can take either one. And if you do that to your item, and then you can also merge these. So if I go format, merge shapes, I can do a union, and now I've got that subtle wave on the bottom of my square, and now I can have that on my infographic. I can also play with like fragments and things like that, but in this particular, like, you could subtract, so that looks good too. So you can merge them or subtract them however you want to do that. And now I have this item. I can copy that and I can take it into my PowerPoint, and now I have, you know, that bottom, and maybe I would want that to be white as my shape. So I could go format picture, fill, solid fill, and I want this to be white. Oh, did I not do that? Solid fill. Huh. I do want that filled. I want it solid. Maybe my line, solid line, white. Huh. That, I don't know why, but should fill that. Yeah, great. So Shelly, I'm glad that's helpful. So let's talk about some other things that are really interesting as well. So let's say that I wanted to put in, and we'll try to troubleshoot this later. I wanted to put in maybe an ice cream cone. So, you know, as PowerPoint has words and then online pictures, and you could add, you know, kind of pictures. So I wanted ice cream cone, but the ice cream cone doesn't really work for this background, right? So I kind of want an interesting background. So one of the things that you can do is if you double click on the picture and go to remove background, you can remove the background of the image. And so in this case, it's very neat. Now, if the colors are close, it gets a little sloppy sometimes. But if I go keep changes, I now have just a free-form ice cream cone with no background. So if you don't like the background of an image that you find online, you can take out the background. So the way to do that is bring in the image. So we'll insert, find an online picture, ice cream. And we'll grab some ice cream, because who does not like ice cream? How about this one? Okay, and then you simply double click and remove background, and you can mark the areas to keep or the areas to remove. So if I select areas to keep, notice up here, it's in purple. Anything in purple will disappear when I keep my changes. So I may want to just draw here and see that that captures that color. I may want to click here to capture that and click here to capture that. So now I have the whole thing, and I just click on keep changes, and now I've got my image. Now, sometimes some images are cleaner than others, so you want to be careful in terms of the edges if you're grabbing some items. But that's another way that you can quickly add an item that looks like very nicely cut out and looks like it would fit maybe on your infographic. Now, another way to do that is to hit insert and then online pictures. And if you type transparent ice cream, then you'll get ice cream. Now, that's the one thing, not all of these are available, even though they appear to be available. Let's see, which one did I know? This one, I think. So notice that this came through with a transparent background. So I can now use that as my transparent item for my infographic. So those are some ways that you can very quickly get a nice image that you would want to use maybe in your infographic. So let me stop there. I have a couple more things to show you, but I wanted to see if there were any questions. All right, is everybody working away on their infographics? Your homework is to post your infographic into Circle. So let me show you a couple other things that we can do then. So one of the things that you're going to want to do most likely is when you first do your slide, let's go new slide. So when you first do your slide, you're going to have this white background. So you can format the background, and this will let you format different items. I typically like to use a gradient fill, and so it just gives you that kind of not a little softer look that you want, but you can also do a picture. So if you have a file of something, you can actually go and find the file. So perhaps maybe I'd want to do the bat cave. I could click on that, and now I have this kind of bat cave background for my infographic that then I could go ahead and then put information on. So this is a really good tool, filling the background, because then the other alternative is you could insert shape and add the shape on the background. Problem with that is if you use that for your whole infographic, and you can, but when you start moving it around or you start putting things on top of it, sometimes you accidentally grab this and move it out of the way, which becomes kind of annoying. And so it works really well. The other thing you can do is you can use this if you wanted to parse part of your background, then I could go ahead to my transparency and I can make this, maybe 90%. Whoops, maybe 85% is better. No, okay, maybe 75. And you can see just a little bit. Now, when you do it a little bit, it really helps with your lettering, but you can decide how transparent you want this, if you want it to be less transparent or more transparent. So you need to play with that a little bit, but it's a nice way to kind of break up an image into its different elements. And here, whoops, I'm going to delete that. I'm going to copy this. And now I have two of them. So you can see the middle is kind of the brightest point, and these two are a little bit shaded, and I can play with that as well. So let's go back to our infographic, our other infographic. Now, one other thing that I like to do in my infographics is I like to add at least one piece of 3D art, just kind of fun, so that I can kind of change this. And if you're online, you can even animate the 3D art. So if you go to animations, I can have my 3D art. If we look here, I can actually have my art. You can see the broccoli turning. So a static infographic doesn't work. Who cares about a piece of broccoli turning, because you can't see that. and a static. But if you have a motion one, you can set up an animation to have different items on your infographic move. Now, that's not always something that I would recommend. So you might not want to take away the attention. But yes, you can, Heather. That's a good point as well. But you can also do that also to just add a little bit of interest. But again, you want to make sure it doesn't take away from your instructional integrity of your item. Now, another thing that I do with my infographics is I typically add icons. So Microsoft has this really nice icon element adder. So you can pick on all kinds of icons that you want. You want business icons, you want celebration icons, you want commerce icons, money icons. You can pick really any type of icon that you would like that's listed here. And notice they come in here. Now, the other nice thing about my icons is I should have picked fruit. I can go ahead and I can do different outlines for my icon. Like notice here, I did an orange accent. So a lot of times we think of an icon and you click on fill and you go, okay, yeah, why don't we make this a blue or a green? It's money. But sometimes not doing the fill, but doing the outline gives like a really neat, it's subtle, but you can see the different highlights of the items. And sometimes that just adds that pop that you're looking for your icon, for your infographic. So it's kind of a nice little thing, little trick to have in your sleeve. Again, you go to outline and you just pick the colors that you want it outlined in. It just kind of adds that extra little zest. And I found for me, for the icons, the lighter shade kind of in the middle, like if it's too light, you can barely see it. If it's too dark, it kind of overpowers it. But the middle just gives it that little glow kind of look, which is a nice way to do the glow of an icon. So you can see how you can see there the contrast of that information. So that's another neat way to add elements to your infographic. Another way, another thing that I've often added to my infographics are 3D models. And and these are kind of nice because you can do a lot of different movements with the 3D models. The broccoli was a 3D model. So if you go to vegetables, let's go to fruit, how about? So you can pick all kinds of different items and then you can play with them. So let's do a strawberry, for example. And it takes a moment that we can get the strawberry in, but if we're doing, instead of, we'll move the broccoli's been demoted. And then you've got these different items that you can play with. So I can move this in different directions and decide how I would like my strawberry displayed. It's kind of a nice element to add that. It just adds that extra little kind of pop that adds interest to the item. And then also what I did with that item to kind of break it up from the background, I added this circle and I made it a gradient and just put the strawberry right on top of that. So that, again, that's another way of thinking about changing your background to add a little visual interest. And you could do that as well. They do add some size. Yes, Raul, that's a good point. If you're doing them for, yeah, they do. You can flatten them in PDF, but they will add a little bit of heft to your file. So if file size is an issue, probably using the 3D image is not the best way to go. Yeah, that's a good point. Let me stop there. Are there other questions? Okay, I just want to show you two more things, and then I would love if somebody's been creating one. I'd love to have some of you share what you've done, because I know you're all much more creative than I am, so I would love to see some of that. In the infographic itself, some of the things that I've done here are just to kind of break up the headers here with the header, with kind of a white header. So I viewed this as different sections. So this can be helpful for calling attention to what the right information is. And notice that I also put in a line to break it up and make it a little bit easier to see that exercise is on one side, eating right is on the other side. So that's one way that you can also help with your infographic or info poster to help the learner make sense of the information, is to move the information a little bit, or I'm sorry, to parse the information a little bit so they have it parsed out where it needs to go. And then the other thing that I did here was I made sure that I bookended the items. Oh, that's a bummer about the Mac. Yeah, Mac still doesn't like, they still don't get along, unfortunately. But I bookend with kind of the top and bottom of the healthy living. So that's a nice way to kind of put everything in a nice, neat package. And then one other thing I wanted to show you here, when I did these particular items on the bottom, I just added just a little bit of a frame to delineate these from one another. It's a subtle. So if you're worried about accessibility and you're worried about folks who might be colorblind, this probably is not the best approach. You would probably want to actually make the contrast a little bit more stark, and you can certainly do that. So I can certainly come to my item and make it a darker color as I did that. So that's something to consider as well. You can see here kind of a much darker color. Maybe move her up or down, and then kind of do a little bit more there. It might even need to be a little bit darker, but you can play with the colors and the contrast so that you can kind of get the look or the feel that you're going for. So let me stop here. Was there anyone, and I'm going to even stop sharing to encourage, has anyone been playing around with their infographic? I'd love to see what you've done and some of the ideas that you've played with already.
Carl, a question for you.
Yes, Deb.
I've used infographics many years ago, but it was more to present information than it was as a learning tool. Is there anything different?
I think I think there's two different things about an infographic from information and for the info poster, which is probably what we use. One is it's really good for reminding people of the steps to take in a process from a learning perspective. And then the other thing is, I would say, is if it's not steps, if it's like safety first, remember these things, have a call to action or call out the behavior that you want to influence. So rather than just providing that information, say, hey, quality depends on you, you need to do these 3 things, and be very specific for the learner to know what they need to do so that they can implement or be reminded of the proper, in this case, safety or quality issues. So I think the difference is we need to make it very very clear what the steps are, if there's an order for the steps, and 2, very clear what the call to action or behavioral change is that we're requesting from the poster. And I often don't think that these posters, or infographics in a course or anything are necessarily, I mean, they should be to some extent standalone, but usually they're part of a larger learning effort. And so they reinforce or help explain things that should already be, at least it shouldn't be brand new to the learner.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. It'd be, there's a course that we're doing coming up that we have some follow-up communication plan, and this I think would be a really creative way to do some of that. So going to look at that.
Do
Yeah.
you think could you use an infographic as like an advanced organizer type thing, or is that crossing the streams in Ghostbuster terms?
Right. No, I think you definitely can. I think so. Let me show you an infographic that I've worked with in the past, and I use it both as an advanced organizer and as a summary. And it's about interactive learning, and it provides that kind of element. So let me just do this.
Oh, Shelley, I saw you made the exact same comment over in at the same time. We're thinking the same way. We're either equally great minds or equally crazy.
Here is this I think Heather did this. Let me share Heather's share screen infographic, which I think is kind of neat. So Heather, you want to talk about this? Explain it a little bit.
So it's basically just a research poster I did for an academic conference. But I used shapes, and I didn't pick the colors. They're my university's colors, but tried to use them strategically to kind of create a bit of a hierarchy, and I wanted to kind of still set it up in the order that people would typically expect to find things in. But I also wanted to make sure that the most important stuff was kind of in the middle, where it's like eye level and easiest to see.
Yeah, it looks great. Now, how large was this?
It was 3 feet by 4 feet.
Okay. So yeah, truly poster size infographic. Very nice. Now, having had today's session, is there anything that you would change or do differently?
I had also kind of forgotten about how you can use the merge shape thing, and I think it is nice to, yeah, for creating some different shapes. Like these are just like the standard shapes, like rectangle with corners cut off, whatever they call it. But I think I could have made things a little more flowy, perhaps not quite so rigid. Yeah, and I struggled with the hierarchy as well. Like if you scroll down a bit, I know that my finding themes are like really big, and they're kind of bigger than my headings, which doesn't quite make sense, but they're also what I wanted people to pay attention to. So
kind of take away what if they were just walking by, this is what you wanted them to take away. Yeah, I think that makes sense, actually.
It grabs the eye, which I think is really
it does.
Karl, I've just put into the chat this infographic that was on LinkedIn, which was a balance sheet. Is this an infographic from your point of view?
Let me see. Let me stop sharing for a moment. See the chat.
I'll put it in again if you want.
And then share.
It's showing Google's revenues, so it's showing a balance sheet and all the elements on there. There you go.
There, yes. So I would love to know everyone's opinion. I would say this is more of an info poster or an informative graph.
Yeah, data viz, I guess.
Yeah.
Whatever the kids are calling it these days.
Right. Yeah, I don't know that this. So from our perspective, I think as learning and development professionals, the goal of our data visualization or infographic or info poster really is to spawn or to remind somebody about a certain behavior, process, procedure, something that we want them to do. And so I don't know that, and I think with a lot of info posters, there's not that end point of guiding somebody to actionable results. And so I think what we need, when we need to do it, when we think about it, is what's the actionable result we want someone to take by looking at our poster or by seeing this information. And I think something like this doesn't have that, is missing that ingredient. Now, it wasn't probably their purpose, but I think for our purpose, we need something along those lines.
Is it that there's no interpretation in this, and we would potentially do some interpretation in a learning infographic, or is that?
I would think, Scott, how you were, like, if you were presenting that in class, or if you were asking a question, or if you were asking, you know, what does this data mean? Then
Right.
I think you could put that in there. Yes.
But that, and having a standalone infographic almost be, I guess that's maybe just another way of saying driving towards an objective or outcome. Is
I think in your example, as long as you had some way to validate the learner's interpretation or correct their misinterpretation, I think that would be appropriate.
right. Because there really isn't any interpretation in this at all. It's simply presentation.
Right.
Right.
And I think in most infographics, I think the ultimate, or the goal of a lot of them, are not to have you interpret anything. Like, here's the information, and
Well,
this
I mean,
is as simple as we can make it.
the interpretation is done on the author side, as opposed to the consumption
That's
side.
correct.
Whereas
Yes.
I would say here, this is probably the interpretation is done by the end, not to get too deeply into Derrida, but you know, or something like that. But yeah, so it's just sort of flipping it around. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. Good. Very good point, Scott. So, Raul, what's your thought on this?
Well, I just liked, you know, when you teach a balance sheet, I mean, I like the graphical representation of, you know, here's my revenue, here's my, you know, costs, etc. Now, you know, if you were teaching this, so, you know, if you were doing this live as instructional design, this would be a great way of showing, you know, and grouping the different areas over there. And you know that product, Karl, that goes in and out, I've forgotten the name, apologies for it. The online tool that goes in and out, whatever it's called. Prezi, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, you can almost have your infographic as your front page of the Prezi. And then, you know, as you have all your different elements on there, you could dive into them and then, you know, teach the concepts even further. I know we're getting away from, you know, infographics, but using that as a way of presenting all your ideas and thoughts. So it's just an overlap. I'm thinking different ways here, Karl. Apologies.
No, that's okay. No, I think using an infographic like that is a great structure for helping the learner organize information, right? So here's how you're going to organize it, and then here's we're going to show you this, and then we're going to show you what it looks like as a regular P&L, and you know, and because people have notoriously have problems understanding the accounting element of organizations, and this would give them that sense of the flow of the money and the revenue and what the expenses are. So I think that this could be very helpful from that perspective. Yeah, a P&L and balance. Yeah, very good. Yeah, this is, I like how this, you know, it reminds me of the Tufte image of Napoleon's troops. If you've ever seen that, that's kind of an interesting, where it gets smaller and smaller and smaller as he loses more and more troops. So those are some thoughts on infographics and maybe what you can do to think about using them in your own instruction, and kind of taking it up a level, doing it either with your own PowerPoint. I think it's amazing that, you know, we all have this tool that we could just open up and start creating it without having to buy anything additional. But if you have something like Canva, that's a nice tool that you can use as well. There's also some other tools, and the thought is to use the visualization of the data and to use the call to action to allow people to have another way of learning that information, another way of consuming that information. I think a lot of times, especially with courses, we don't think about, well, what about outside the course or after the course, or what about reinforcements? We think a lot of times that the reinforcement is, maybe an email or maybe some other information or something about that. But sometimes just having that little visual reminder can be really, really helpful. And sometimes it's really good from that long-term learning reinforcement perspective. So, other questions?
Well, how about this? If they had, sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
Oh, I was, so one of my thoughts about how to use this, so we have internal wiki pages for like every single thing that exists in our company, and it is all text, like just so much text. So I was thinking an infographic might be a nice way to sort of break up all the text or call out pieces, but there may not really be a call to action for anything other than like, here's another way. But if we were to go that route, would you still recommend keeping whatever information is on an infographic still in all of the text itself, and then like the infographic just highlights some of what they might have read or might be reading, or would you replace it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the infographic, I'm a big believer in multimodal delivery. So of having both, if I just want to look at the infographic, I do, but if I want to read it, it's there also. So especially with the cost of storage of things so small, I would just leave both there. That's my opinion. I would just leave both there. And if the person wants to read it, they can. If they want to look at the infographic, they can as well. But the infographic is really going to be more of the highlights and the really great information. So that's what you would want to have in that particular infographic. And I again, as I said before, in that case, it might not be an infographic. It might be an info poster, because you're not really having a call to action. But the key, the real driver is a quick visualization and digestion of the content, so that you don't have to, interpret it or think about it. It's just there, and okay, that makes sense, and then go. Especially because the infographic or the Wikipedia page or the wiki page is probably more of a reference than actual somebody using it for the on the job. So I would just put that information there.
Okay. Thank you.
I just had a thought, if you would have attended a course, and at the end of the course, you could have, these are all our major themes. So now work together to create your call for action by pulling what you think might be useful to you. So you could give them a bit of fun for half an hour, and they can make their own. It becomes a legacy through their own infographic.
That's a great idea. That's a great idea. I love that. What a great way to construct and reinforce your knowledge at the end of your learning experience. Yeah, I really like that.
Because that's the thing that gets me on LinkedIn all the time, Karl, is these infographics. I just saw one today. I'm going to teach strategy soon, and the entire 3-day course was there in one beautiful image, and you just think, wow. I mean, that's what grabbed me, and if it grabs me, it must grab. I mean, it must stay in people's memories a bit longer, and particularly if they collaborated together as well.
Yeah, and if you give them the pieces to create their own, then they're, back to constructivism, and they're adding a lot of their own ideas and thoughts in there. It's gonna stick with them much longer. So yeah, I like that.
And that's one of the beauties of doing it in Zoom, in the e-world, is that we can give them the access rather than in the room where you've got classic, pen and paper.
Yes.
You just need to construct a bit of time though at the end to do that. But it might well be the highlight actually.
Yeah. And so speaking of homework and after class, go ahead and put some of this action, some of these tips in action. Go ahead and create your homework. Would be create an infographic, post it up in Circle. We'll take a look at it. Anxious to see what you come up with. And as Andrew said, it's one thing to kind of watch and kind of follow along with the instructor on Zoom. It's another thing to just do it yourself. There's lots of lessons learned and lots of things that you'll discover that way. So please go ahead and do that. And I will also, I found the infographic that I was looking for. I will also post this infographic. It's more of like elements of interactive learning, but I use this sometimes before and sometimes after sessions that I give. So kind of as a advanced organizer and as a takeaway. So if you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, we'll see you in a few weeks for our final session.